My name is Rachel Miller. I'm 31 years old. And just 3 nights ago, I came back from a high-stakes business trip that was supposed to be the biggest breakthrough of my career. But when the taxi pulled up to my dream home in Denver, the house I had poured my sweat and soul into, something was wrong. The porch light that always flicked on at sunset was dark. My key wouldn't turn in the lock. At first, I thought I was exhausted and fumbling. But then the truth hit me. The locks had been changed. Heart pounding, I drove to my parents' house, searching for answers. Inside, my younger brother, Ethan, lounged smugly on the couch, swiping through glossy photos of turquoise water and overwater villas in Bora Bora, a luxury vacation that could never, ever fit within his empty bank account. Then my father turned to me, his voice chillingly casual. "Your house paid for it. We sold it." The words ripped through me like a blade. Years of sacrifice, every late night, every dollar I scraped together, gone. They had stolen not just my house, but the symbol of my independence, my safety, my future. But instead of screaming, I smiled. My father's smirk faltered. "What's so funny?" he snapped. If only he knew. If only he understood that what they had just set in motion would destroy far more than they imagined. This is the story of how my family's betrayal turned into their downfall, and my ultimate revenge. If you've ever felt underestimated, used, or betrayed by the people who should love you most, stay with me. And while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support helps me keep sharing these untold stories. I grew up in a modest neighborhood on the east side of Denver, Colorado. From the outside, our 2-story home with its weather-worn porch looked like any other in the row of houses built back in the 70s. But behind those walls was a story that shaped every corner of my life. My parents always told the neighbors that they were fair with their children, but inside the family, there was a rule unspoken yet rigid. Everything revolved around Ethan, my younger brother by 4 years. When I was 10 and he was 6, I had already learned that no matter what I achieved, Ethan's smallest effort was celebrated louder. If I brought home straight A's, my parents would nod, offer a distracted good job, and go back to whatever they were doing. But when Ethan remembered to feed the dog once in a week, there were hugs, applause, and ice cream trips to Baskin-Robbins. That imbalance grew more brutal as we aged. By high school, I worked part-time at the local diner every evening, balancing homework under the dim fluorescent lights after my shift. The clinking of dishes and the smell of frying oil became the soundtrack of my teenage years. I wasn't working for fun money. Every dollar went into a jar marked college. My parents claimed they couldn't help with tuition because times were tough. Yet, the very same month, Ethan turned 16, and they surprised him with a shiny black Jeep parked in the driveway, complete with a red bow. I'll never forget standing on the porch that day, my apron from the diner still tied around my waist, watching Ethan jump into the driver's seat, honking the horn like he was king of the block. My mother hugged him, tears in her eyes, saying, "You deserve it, sweetheart. You've been through so much stress." Stress? He had never worked a single shift in his life. Meanwhile, I scraped together tips to buy secondhand textbooks. There were hundreds of little injustices, but some still sting like fresh wounds. One winter, during a blizzard, my father asked me to shovel the driveway before school. I bundled up, hands aching from the cold, shoveling for nearly an hour until the concrete gleamed. When Ethan woke up hours later and casually brushed snow off his car windshield, Dad clapped him on the back, praising his hard work. My protests were brushed aside. "Stop being dramatic, Rachel. You're always trying to make yourself look like the victim." That line, "stop being dramatic," became a refrain throughout my life, the dismissal of my feelings whenever I dared to point out the imbalance. My grandmother, Margaret, was the only refuge. She lived in a small ranch house just 3 miles away. I would bike there after my diner shifts, sometimes arriving close to midnight. Her porch light was always on. Inside, the scent of apple pie, and her gentle voice washed over me like a balm. "You're stronger than you realize, Rachel," she would say as she poured me tea. And one day, that strength will be the very thing they underestimate. Grandma had lived through her own hardships, widowed young, raising 2 children while working as a school librarian. She recognized the favoritism and injustice long before I did, but she never poisoned me with bitterness. Instead, She gave me wisdom. Take notes on what hurts you, sweetheart. One day, you'll know how to turn that pain into power. I didn't fully understand her words then. I only knew that her house felt safe, in a way mine never did. Still, even as I endured the neglect, I held on to the naive hope that one day my parents would see me. Truly see me. I imagined them sitting in the bleachers at my high school graduation, finally proud of my achievements. That day came. I was valedictorian, delivering a speech I had written and rewritten a dozen times. As I stood at the podium, heart swelling with pride, I searched the crowd. My parents were there, yes, but they weren't watching me. They were fawning over Ethan, who was showing them a new app on his phone. When I walked off the stage, diploma in hand, my father merely muttered, "Good speech." I told myself to swallow it down. Keep pushing. Keep working. College was no different. While Ethan coasted through life with allowances, gadgets, and trips fully funded, I took on 3 jobs. Morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening tutoring sessions, and weekend hours at a bookstore. My schedule left me perpetually exhausted. My diet sustained on instant ramen and vending machine snacks. Yet, I managed to graduate a year early with honors, debt-free but bone-weary. When I finally saved enough for the down payment on a house years later, I felt like I had scaled Mount Everest. It wasn't just about the property. It was about finally owning something that was truly mine, untainted by favoritism or stolen credit. The house was a 1950s craftsman-style home with oak floors, a brick fireplace, and a backyard large enough to plant roses in honor of Grandma Margaret, who had passed away a few years earlier. Standing in that backyard with the soil under my nails, I felt her presence as if she were whispering, "This is yours, Rachel. This is your strength taking root." But when I invited my family over to see the house, their reactions cut like knives. Mom wrinkled her nose. "The kitchen is outdated. Are you sure this was a good investment?" Dad raised an eyebrow. "Hope you didn't overpay. The market's tricky." And Ethan? He laughed. "Seriously? This place looks like something out of a black and white movie. Good luck fixing it. No congratulations. No pride. Just dismissal, as though my sacrifice meant nothing. For 2 years, I poured everything into that house. I painted the walls myself, sanded and polished the hardwood floors until they shone, and planted rows of roses that bloomed crimson each spring. It became more than a house. It was my sanctuary, a declaration of independence after years of being invisible. Yet even in those moments of triumph, 2 shadows hung over me. First, Ethan had grown increasingly bold about his entitlement. He once joked at a family dinner, "Hey Rachel, when you're tired of that house, just hand me the keys. I'll take good care of it." The table erupted in laughter, but the way he looked at me sent a chill through my spine. Second, my father had begun asking pointed questions about my finances. "How much equity have you built up? What's the market value in your neighborhood now?" He asked with feigned curiosity, but his eyes glinted with something I couldn't name at the time. I brushed off those warning signs, chalking them up to paranoia. But deep down, Grandma's words echoed. "They will underestimate your strength. Don't underestimate their capacity to betray you." I should have listened. Independence had never come easily to me. It was carved out of exhaustion, one choice at a time. After graduating college early, I landed an entry-level role at a Denver marketing firm. While others celebrated their first salaries by splurging on furniture or trips, I made different choices. Every paycheck was dissected, tracked down to the cent. Lunches were never bought. Always homemade, packed in worn containers. Social outings were politely declined. "Sorry, I can't make it," became my most used phrase, not because I lacked the desire for friendships, but because I couldn't justify the cost of cocktails or weekend getaways. While my peers enjoyed brunches downtown, I was clipping coupons and calculating mortgage calculators late into the night. All the while, Ethan drifted through life without consequence. He enrolled in college, but quit after a semester, complaining it was too stressful. My parents nodded sympathetically, insisting he was finding his path. They covered his rent when he moved into a trendy loft, paid off his credit card debt when he racked up thousands on designer sneakers, and even financed his failed YouTube channel, a channel where he reviewed luxury cars he didn't own. Meanwhile, I worked long hours at the firm, often volunteering for late-night projects because I knew visibility mattered. I was the first to arrive and the last to leave, the one who stayed calm when clients demanded impossible deadlines. Slowly, painfully, it paid off. Within 5 years, I had climbed to marketing manager, not because of favors, but because I was relentless. But the sacrifices didn't end at work. There was the relationship I lost in my late 20s, a man named Daniel who wanted to build a future together. He couldn't understand why I refused vacations or why I insisted on saving instead of spending. "You live like money is a prison," he once said during an argument. "Why can't you let yourself enjoy life?" He didn't see that for me. Saving wasn't fear, it was survival. When he proposed a trip to Italy and I declined, he packed his bags, saying he wanted a partner who could live in the moment. It stung, but I didn't waver. My house mattered more. The stability I craved mattered more. Even after finally buying the house, the sacrifices didn't stop. I spent weekends sanding floors, repainting walls, and patching the roof instead of relaxing. While Ethan posted selfies in Vegas, surrounded by champagne bottles and rented sports cars, I spent Saturday nights with paint-stained hands and aching knees. I remember one evening especially. The sky outside was streaked pink and gold, the kind of Colorado sunset that takes your breath away. I sat on the porch steps with blistered palms after a day of tearing up old carpet. Ethan pulled up in his Jeep, music blasting, and smirked at me. "You know, Rachel, if you had just asked Mom and Dad for help, you wouldn't be killing yourself like this." But I couldn't ask them. I knew their help came with strings, with judgments, with the same dismissive tone that had followed me all my life. No, I would do this on my own, even if it cost me everything. In those quiet nights alone in the house, I often whispered to the memory of Grandma Margaret. "I hope you're proud," I'd say, running my hands across the wooden floors. Her voice echoed back in memory. "You're stronger than you realize." That strength became both my shield and my prison. It kept me going, but it also hardened me, made me carry burdens I should have been able to share. By the time the company selected me for an international business trip, a 2-week pitch in Singapore that could launch my career into the next tier, I was exhausted but determined. This was the opportunity one had sacrificed everything for. If I succeeded, it could mean a promotion, a raise, maybe even enough breathing room to finally enjoy the life I had built. But what I didn't realize was that while I was sacrificing everything to rise higher, my family was watching, not with pride, but with hunger. They saw not my strength, but my resources. And in their eyes, my sacrifices weren't noble. They were assets waiting to be taken. The plane touched down in Denver close to 9 p.m. after 2 draining weeks in Singapore. My body ached from sleepless nights, from endless client dinners, from the weight of knowing this project could change my career forever. All I wanted was to collapse into my bed, surrounded by the walls of the home I had built with my own hands. But as the taxi pulled into my street, unease stirred. The porch light I had programmed to flick on every evening was dark. My stomach knotted. I climbed the steps, dragging my suitcase behind me, and slid my key into the lock. It didn't budge. Confused, I tried again, then pulled out the spare. Nothing. That's when I saw it. A brand new brass lock, gleaming in the porch light. My heart dropped. Had there been a break-in? My mind raced. I fumbled for my phone, dialing my mother. Straight to voicemail. I tried my father. On the 3rd ring, he answered, his tone unsettlingly cheerful. "Rachel, you're back. How was Singapore?" "Dad, the locks on my house are changed." "What happened? Did something go wrong?" There was a pause, then his voice hardened. "Come to our house. We need to talk." The words landed like a stone in my chest. I gave the driver a new address. Rain streaked across the windshield as we pulled into my parents' driveway. Their living room lights glowed warmly, a cruel contrast to the cold dread building inside me. When I walked in, the scene was surreal. My mother was bustling in the kitchen, pretending not to see me. My father sat reclined in his chair, watching a basketball game with feigned casualness. And Ethan, sprawled across the couch, was swiping through his phone, laughter spilling from his lips. "Check this out," he said, thrusting his phone toward me. On the screen were photos of him in Bora Bora, lounging in an infinity pool, sipping champagne on a private deck, posing in front of turquoise lagoons. My throat tightened. How did you afford this? Ethan's grin widened. 5 stars, baby. All inclusive. You wouldn't believe the spa treatments. Best trip of my life. Before I could process, my father muted the TV and leaned forward, eyes cold. Your house paid for it. We sold it. The room tilted. You what? We sold it, he repeated, as if discussing a routine chore. Got a great price. All cash. Closed in 10 days. It was the practical thing to do. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the back of a chair, trying to steady myself. You sold my house? Without my permission? That's not just wrong, that's illegal. My mother finally emerged from the kitchen, wringing her hands. Ethan needed this trip, Rachel. He was heartbroken after Emily left him. You know how fragile he is. We had to do something. Fragile? I snapped, my voice cracking. You stole my home because your 27-year-old son couldn't handle a breakup? It wasn't just for him. She shot back defensively. We needed a new car too. And some of the money went toward bills. You're successful. You'll bounce back. The words felt like poison. Every sacrifice, every late night, every scraped dollar, wiped away for their indulgence. But the cruelty wasn't done. Don't be so dramatic, my father sneered. You're doing fine. You can buy another house. Besides, we're your parents. What's yours is ours. That's how family works. No, I said, my voice trembling but firm. That's how theft works. Ethan scoffed. Oh, come on. You act like this house was some miracle. You just got lucky with timing and jobs. Meanwhile, I've been struggling. For once, Mom and Dad chose me. Get over it. I stared at him in disbelief. The entitlement, the smugness, it was suffocating. But then came the final gut punch. By the way, my father added casually, we had to clear out the furniture. Sold most of it along with the house. That antique desk of your grandmother's? Got a nice price for it. Some of your art, too. Don't worry, we kept her clothes. The blood drained from my face. My grandmother's desk, the last tangible piece of her I had left, gone. I felt the ground slip beneath me. And just when I thought the humiliation couldn't deepen, I heard laughter. I turned. My Aunt Carol, Uncle Steve, and 2 cousins were sitting in the adjoining dining room. They had been there all along. What is this? I demanded. Oh, we invited family over, Mom said sheepishly. We thought it was time everyone saw Ethan's happiness after so much hardship. So there it was. My downfall turned into their showcase. My stolen sacrifices paraded as Ethan's victory. Something inside me snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. Slowly, deliberately. My father's smirk faltered. What's so funny, he barked. I lifted my suitcase. You'll see. As I turned toward the door, Ethan muttered. She's just jealous. She'll calm down. But they had no idea. No idea that every camera I had installed in my home before leaving, cameras they never noticed, had captured all. The forged signatures, the meetings with the realtor, the boxes carried out in the night. No idea that my grandmother's trust, hidden from their knowledge, had strict provisions about family theft. They thought they had destroyed me. But in reality, they had written their own undoing. I walked into the rainy night, each step steadier than the last. For the first time in years, I wasn't the invisible daughter, the overlooked sister. I was something far more dangerous. I was the storm they never saw coming. When I stepped out into the cold Denver rain that night, suitcase dragging behind me, I felt hollow. It wasn't just that my house had been stolen. It was that the very people who should have defended me had orchestrated the theft. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it felt less like losing a house and more like losing the illusion of family. The rain blurred my vision, though I couldn't tell if it was from the storm or my own tears. I called a cab and sat in the back seat, staring blankly out the window as the driver made small talk I couldn't register. My reflection in the glass looked foreign, pale, trembling, eyes swollen with disbelief. I ended up at the apartment of my best friend, Jessica, who had been my confidant since college. She opened the door in pajamas, confusion shifting to alarm the second she saw me. Rachel, what happened? I collapsed onto her couch, words spilling out in broken fragments. The changed locks, the smug smiles, the vacation, the desk, my grandmother's desk. By the time I finished, Jessica was pacing the room, fists clenched. They sold your house? Without your permission? That's not just wrong, Rachel, that's criminal. Her outrage mirrored the storm inside me, but I felt paralyzed. What am I supposed to do? It's gone. Everything I worked for. Everything I sacrificed. They treated it like a vacation fund. My voice cracked on the last words. The humiliation was sharpest of all. I kept replaying the scene. Ethan gloating with his photos, my parents smirking, relatives overhearing like it was entertainment. Years of clawing my way to independence, reduced to a punchline in my own living room. That night, lying awake in Jessica's guest room, despair pressed on me like a weight I couldn't move. I thought about the years of skip dinners, of late nights hunched over spreadsheets, of saying no to love because I couldn't afford to lose focus. What was it all for if they could strip it away in 2 weeks? For the first time in years, I wondered if Grandma Margaret had been wrong about me. Maybe I wasn't stronger than they thought. Maybe I was just a fool who believed hard work could outweigh favoritism, who thought love could be earned from people determined not to give it. But then I remembered her voice. Clear. Steady. Families should lift you up, Rachel, not tear you down. And you deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. The memory hurt, but it also steadied me. Because if she were alive, she wouldn't tell me to wallow. She'd tell me to fight. Not with fists or shouting, but with truth, with proof, with the quiet, unshakable force of someone who knows they've been wronged. The next morning, exhaustion still heavy in my bones, I sifted through my bag and pulled out the small black notebook I always carried. It held pages of financial notes, goals, even a checklist of home repairs. On the inside cover, in Grandma's handwriting, was a single line. Strength isn't loud. It's relentless. I traced the ink with my finger. Something inside me shifted. My parents thought they had silenced me, reduced me to nothing. But they hadn't accounted for what I had done before leaving for Singapore. They hadn't known about the cameras. They hadn't known about the trust. And in that realization, my despair hardened into something else. Resolve. I still felt broken, yes. Betrayed, yes. Humiliated beyond words. But buried beneath all of it was a new certainty. This wasn't over. They thought they had won, but they hadn't even seen the battlefield yet. The storm they had unleashed wasn't just grief, it was me. 2 days later, I walked into the downtown office of Michael Harris, my grandmother's longtime attorney. He was in his late 60s, with sharp blue eyes that had seen countless betrayals play out in boardrooms and courtrooms. I was expecting you, he said, sliding a folder across the polished oak desk. Your grandmother prepared for this. Inside were the documents of the Margaret Collins Living Trust. My grandmother hadn't just left me her words of wisdom, she had left me legal armor. The house was purchased through the trust, with me as trustee. That meant no one, not even my parents, could legally sell it without my direct consent. Mr. Harris leaned back. And there's more. Margaret anticipated that your father's entitlement might resurface. She included a specific clause. Any family member who attempts to misappropriate trust assets immediately forfeits their inheritance rights. I swallowed hard. So by selling my house, they have disinherited themselves. Permanently. It hit me then. My parents and Ethan hadn't just stolen my house. They cut themselves off from every future dollar my grandmother had set aside. Investments, cash reserves, even the lakeside cabin in Colorado Springs. All of it now flowed to me. And that wasn't the only weapon in my arsenal. Before leaving for Singapore, I had installed discrete cameras around the house. I had hours of cloud-backed footage, my parents rifling through my papers, my mother practicing my signature, Ethan hauling boxes into a moving truck. Proof of fraud, proof of theft, proof of betrayal. The next step was clear. I wanted more than legal paperwork. I wanted them exposed. So I arranged a dinner, a family dinner, at a private room in a Denver restaurant overlooking the Platte River. I invited not just my parents and Ethan, but uncles, aunts, cousins, the same extended family who had witnessed their favoritism for years but stayed silent. This time they would see the truth. When my parents arrived, Dad looked smug, Mom nervous, Ethan glued to his phone. My father clapped me on the shoulder. Good to see you've come to your senses, Rachel. Family dinner's a nice touch. I forced a polite smile. Yes, Dad. Tonight's about family. Dinner passed with small talk. Ethan boasted about his trip, describing the Bora Bora sunsets like he had earned them. My father laughed too loudly at his own stories. My mother kept glancing at me, waiting for the explosion that didn't come. When dessert was served, I stood. Thank you all for coming. I invited you because there's been a misunderstanding that needs to be cleared and witnessed. The room fell quiet. I nodded at Jessica, who had helped me set up the projector. Footage filled the wall. My father digging through my desk, Ethan bragging, my mother tracing my signature until she finally forged it. Gasps rippled through the room. My Aunt Carol covered her mouth. My Uncle Steve muttered, "My God." My father shot to his feet. Turn that off. This is private family business. No, I said firmly. This is fraud. And it's criminal. Detective Ramirez, who had agreed to attend unofficially, stepped forward from the corner where he had been waiting. She's right. Forgery and fraudulent transfer of trust property are serious offenses. My mother's face drained of color. Ethan stammered. It's not, we didn't, it was Dad's idea. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the trust documents. The house wasn't even mine directly. It belonged to Grandma's trust. And she anticipated this. She wrote a clause. Any family member who tries to steal trust property loses everything. Every cent. Every asset. Every inheritance. Effective immediately. The color drained from my father's face. What are you talking about? What inheritance? Mr. Harris, seated beside me, spoke clearly. The trust included substantial financial assets, stock investments, savings, and property. Your mother, Margaret Collins, designated distributions to both of you and Ethan upon Rachel's 35th birthday. Each of you stood to inherit $250,000. Until now. The room went silent. Then Ethan exploded. $250,000? You never told me that. He spun on my parents, his voice shrill. You told me this was safe. That she'd never know. You said it would be simple. Mom cried, turning on Dad. For the first time in my life, I watched them unravel. Their unity, their smug superiority, gone. They were scrambling, desperate, exposed. You've ruined us. Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. No, I said coldly. You ruined yourselves. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see. One by one, my relatives voiced their disgust. How could you do this to your own daughter? My Aunt Carol whispered. We always suspected favoritism, but this is monstrous. Detective Ramirez cleared his throat. Robert and Linda Miller. Ethan Miller. I'll need you to come in for questioning regarding fraud and forgery. You're not under arrest yet, but that's a formality at this point. My father made one last desperate attempt. Rachel, please. We're your parents. We put food on the table. We gave you a roof over your head. You owe us. I met his eyes, my voice steady. I owed you respect, and I gave it. I owed you gratitude, and I gave it. But I don't owe you my house, my money, or my future. You taught me that family means control. Grandma taught me it means protection. I choose her version. As Detective Ramirez led them out, my family sat stunned. Silence heavier than any storm. I stood tall. The daughter they had underestimated. The sister they had mocked. They had stolen my house. But in doing so, they had lost everything. In the weeks that followed, the legal wheels turned exactly as Mr. Harris predicted. The fraudulent sale was reversed. The trust provisions were enforced, and my parents and Ethan were cut off forever. They lost the money they thought they had stolen, and with it, the illusion of control they had always wielded over me. But the real victory wasn't the house or the inheritance. It was the moment I realized I no longer needed their approval, their validation, or even their presence in my life. The family I thought I had lost was never truly there. The one I built, with friends who stood by me, and the legacy of a grandmother who believed in me, was stronger than anything blood had ever given me. So I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have fought back or walked away? Tell me in the comments. And if this story